I always thought I knew what the worst days of my life were. The day I lost my husband, the day I thought I would never again have peace in my own home, the day I realized that loneliness had become my most constant companion. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment my stepson walked through the front door carrying a white envelope, carefully folded as if it were some kind of gift. He didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was, didn't even show the slightest bit of politeness anyone would have when crossing the gate of a house that wasn't theirs. He simply held out the envelope as if delivering a sentence. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. I remember the texture of the paper. I remember the sound. That stiff snap when I pulled the document out, as if the paper itself were tense, holding its breath, awaiting my reaction. I remember his voice, cold, calculated, almost rehearsed, saying, "You have 30 days to vacate. The house is rightfully mine." Law? That word pierced me like a knife. In that instant, my mind seemed to want to escape my own body. I stared at him in disbelief. The same boy my husband had raised with so much sacrifice, the same one I had taken in when he was still a teenager full of anger at the world, was now calling me an intruder in the home we had built together, brick by brick, tear by tear. The air in the room grew heavy. The afternoon light streaming through the window felt colder, as if the room itself had understood that. Something terrible had just happened. I felt my heart racing, my breath becoming ragged, my fingers trembling as I held the paper that decreed my expulsion, my entire marriage, my whole life in there, suddenly treated as nothing. Betrayal has its own way of presenting itself. It doesn't arrive gradually. It arrives like a punch, suddenly, without warning, violently. And that's how I felt, like someone who took an unexpected blow in the middle of a seemingly normal conversation. I looked at his face and noticed something I had never seen before. Satisfaction, a gleam of victory, as if he were finally taking back something he thought was his. He talked about numbers, he talked about lawyers, he talked about rights, but none of it made sense to me. All I could think about was, how did he have the courage? I sensed a plan behind his anger, something carefully constructed, like someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Since my husband passed away, he had been showing up from time to time, always with questions about the house, about documents, about the will. I thought it was concern, but now it was clear. It was strategy. Each visit, each innocent phrase, each polite gesture, everything was part of a plan to get me out of there. And at that moment, something broke inside me. My house, once full of memories, now seemed like a silent battlefield. The sofa where my husband and I watched television, the table where we had coffee every morning, the picture frames that held our history, everything had lost its color. It seemed threatened, fragile, about to be ripped from me as if I were just an inconvenient guest. When I finally managed to open my mouth to say something, my voice came out weak, trembling, almost unrecognizable. "This must be some kind of mistake. Your father would never do this to me." He simply crossed his arms, tilted his head to the side, and said, "He's not here anymore to say anything, is he?" That sentence was more cruel than the document. My legs felt like they were about to give way. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It felt like my bones had lost their strength, as if every memory of my husband was being used against me. The house that had once been a refuge now seemed like a silent enemy, staring at me with walls I no longer recognized. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath, and then, when I opened them again, I saw my stepson standing in front of me, firm, determined to expel me from there as if I were an obstacle. His coldness was so intense that for a moment I felt fear, real fear, genuine fear. And at that moment something surged within me, a strange feeling, a distant memory. My husband always said the attic held important things. I never asked exactly what they were. I thought they were just old objects, old memories. But that day, amidst the shock, his phrase returned to my mind like a whisper. The attic, something I had been unaware of for years. Even he never imagined that the hidden past up there would turn the tables. While my stepson awaited my reaction, something began to grow within me. It wasn't courage yet. It was instinct. A deep, almost spiritual intuition that said, below. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know how it could help. But something inside me told me the answer was up there, sleeping among dust, old boxes, and secrets my husband had never fully revealed. And in that cold room, holding a document that was trying to snatch my life from my hands, I took a deep breath and made the decision that, unknowingly, would save everything. I was going to go up to the attic. For many people, the word stepchild conjures up images of someone who is half in and half out of the family, someone who arrives with the marriage and learns to live with it. But in my case, that word always carried extra weight. From the first day I met my husband's son, I perceived in his eyes a kind of resistance, an invisible wall, an emotional barrier that none of my attempts could overcome. It was as if he had decided while still young that I would never be a part of his world, no matter how hard I tried. I remember the first time he entered our house after I married his father. He looked around as if examining every object, every piece of furniture, as if he wanted to find something wrong, something to justify rejecting my presence. He didn't smile. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't call me by name. He simply treated me as if I were a temporary visitor, someone who would one day disappear, and perhaps deep down that's exactly what he wanted. In the years that followed, our relationship never went beyond a cold and overly polite coexistence, too sincere to be genuine. He would show up for birthdays, special occasions, but never to see me. It was always for his father, and even on those occasions, his demeanor was the same, distant, distrustful, calculating. He observed everything. He observed my behavior, my decisions, the way I took care of the house. It was as if he was always evaluating whether I deserved to be there, and in his mind, I never did. I tried to get closer. I tried to be kind. I tried to build bonds. I would make coffee when he came over, ask about work, about life, offer help when he seemed overwhelmed, but every gesture of mine met the same fate: rejection. He would respond with monosyllables, with silence, or with that look that made it clear that for him, I was just an obstacle between him and his father, an uncomfortable presence occupying the space that was once only his. My husband, on the other hand, always believed that our son would change someday. He used to say, "He just needs time. He's complicated, but he's not bad." I wanted to believe it. I really did. But over the years, I realized that what my husband called complicated was actually a bitter mix of resentment, ego, and a profound inability to accept that his father had found happiness again. When my husband fell ill, the situation worsened. Instead of getting closer, my stepson only started showing up to talk about documents, bills, and assets. I could see in his eyes that his concern wasn't for his father. It was for what his father would leave behind. It was as if he were counting the days, as if he were already planning for the future without the man who had given him everything, and that tore me apart inside. I cared for my husband day and night, while he drifted further and further away. My stepson, always cold, always distant, began to act as if he were already the heir to everything, as if I were just a hired caregiver, someone voiceless, unimportant, without a history in that home. I can still hear some of his phrases, spoken with that silent arrogance. "When all this is over, we'll see what the house will be like." My father was never one to leave things disorganized. He must have some important papers stored away. You need to understand that afterwards, everything changes. The after. He spoke of this after as if he were talking about a change of season, and every word he said made it clear that in his mind, my place there was temporary, precarious, almost accidental. And then the worst happened. My husband passed away, and the instant the coffin hit the ground, I felt something inside my stepson being released. Not emotion, not pain, but ambition. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He didn't waver. He stood. Still, his gaze fixed on the gravestone, like someone mentally marking the beginning of a new phase of life. I will never forget that look. It was the look of someone who deeply believes that nothing is hindering his plans anymore. From that day on, He began to act as if he owned everything. He would arrive unannounced. He would open doors as if they were locked for no reason. He would walk through the house as if he were inspecting each room, evaluating, calculating, planning. He spoke to me with an even more cutting coldness, as if I, along with my husband, had lost any vestige of value that he pretended to attribute to me. And me, I felt abandoned, wronged, betrayed by someone who, even though we were never close, I treated with respect. My husband always wanted us to get along. I tried to honor that wish until the end. But now, without him, it was as if my stepson had finally revealed his true face, the face of someone who never saw me as family, who never wanted to share anything, with me, who always waited for the right moment to move forward. And the greatest injustice is that I knew, deep down, that my husband trusted me. He trusted me so much that he left some important matters in my hands. But for my stepson, that was unforgivable. He saw my care, my love, my effort as a threat. And the more he believed I had some kind of power, the more aggressive he became. So when he showed up with the eviction notice, part of me wasn't surprised. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, yes. But surprised? No. It was as if all the little cracks in our relationship had finally broken open, revealing what had always been there, a total absence of connection, respect, and affection. The truth is, for him, I was never part of that family. And it was this bitter mix, abandonment, injustice, and betrayal, that led me to remember something my husband always said. If one day you have doubts about what is yours, look in the attic. He never imagined that this advice would be the key to unmasking his own son and me. I never imagined that the attic held the only piece of evidence capable of saving everything my husband left me. I will never forget that day. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can relive every second, every movement, every breath caught in my throat. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those that seem so peaceful they almost deceive you. The sun streamed through the thin curtains of the living room, illuminating the furniture with a gentle golden glow. I was organizing some mementos of my husband, old scraps of paper, notes he left scattered around the house, like little reminders of his love. Nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. I heard the firm knock at the gate, 3 short taps. Then, the creak of the door being opened without permission. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The way he entered, as if he had bought the air he breathed, said it all. My stepson crossed the living room door with calculated, almost rehearsed steps. He wore that expression of exaggerated confidence, chin raised, defiant gaze, rigid posture, as if he were going to an important meeting, not to emotionally destroy someone. In his right hand, he held a stack of folded papers, and these weren't ordinary papers. From a distance, you could see the legal stamp, the dark lettering, the firm's letterhead. It was the kind of document that carries weight, that has intent, that carries a threat. The kind of paper that doesn't arrive to start a conversation. It arrives to end one. He didn't ask if I was busy, didn't offer a greeting, didn't show even the slightest bit of humanity. He simply stretched out his arm and placed the envelope on the table, making a dry noise that cut through the air of the room. A noise so loud it seemed to fill more space than the house itself. "It's time to settle this, once and for all," he said, his voice so firm it sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. I took a deep breath before touching the document. Something inside me already knew that this wasn't a gentle warning nor a pending conversation. It was an attack, a sentence, a decision made without me, without my voice, without my right to exist within the story I myself helped to build. When I opened the first sheet of paper, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," he recited aloud, as if he were reading to someone who was stupid or deaf. 30 days, 1 month, 4 weeks to abandon everything. I had lived there for decades. Decades. It was the house where my husband and I built a life, where we celebrated birthdays, where we faced losses, where we kept memories. A house that wasn't just a set of walls. It was the setting for our story, the place where my heart felt it belonged. And now to him, I was just an obstacle that needed to be removed. When I finally managed to look up and meet his gaze, I saw an almost gleaming arrogance in his eyes, as if he were doing the world a favor. He continued talking, but my head was spinning so much that the words came out distorted, as if I were underwater. This house has always belonged to my father, and now it's mine. I have a legitimate right to the property. This formalizes what should have already happened. Legitimate right. He repeated those words with such conviction that for a second I almost believed I was wrong. Almost. But something inside me knew that this wasn't right. My husband was a just man. He would never leave his wife helpless. He would never allow his own son to use his death as a weapon to drive me out. The absurdity was so great that my body reacted on its own. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. My hand trembled, and the paper seemed heavier than it should be. I folded it slowly, trying to buy some time to understand what was happening, but my stepson interpreted my silence as weakness and took the opportunity to press even harder. He came closer, placed both hands on the table, and looking directly into my eyes, said, "I swore the house was rightfully mine, and now I'm going to make sure of it." The certainty with which he said that left me breathless. He truly believed he had power over everything. He believed it deeply. He believed it so much that, if it were up to him, I would be on the street the next day. He didn't see memories. He didn't see history. He didn't see humanity. He saw property, only property. And at that moment, I felt something even worse than anger. Humiliation. Humiliation at seeing someone who lived with me for so many years treat me like a stranger. Humiliation at realizing that he didn't even feel guilty. Humiliation at realizing he wasn't there to talk. He was there to win. As he spoke, my mind drifted back to the past, to family dinners, to the conversations my husband tried to foster between us. He always sought to bring us closer, always believed that one day our son would recognize my worth. But there, in that room, with that document in my hands, it became clear that my husband's dream would never come true. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since his death, felt a pain so profound it almost overwhelmed me. It was as if I were losing my husband again, this time to the ambition of his own son. "The house was legally his," the stepson repeated in the same arrogant tone. I swallowed hard, but inside me a phrase immediately echoed. He swore the house was legally his, but it wasn't. I knew that. My husband knew about it, and deep down, even his son knew, but preferred to ignore it. With the document already in my hands, I realized that this battle wouldn't just be emotional. It would be legal, moral, spiritual, and I was alone. Alone facing someone who had prepared, who had support, who had a plan. I, on the other hand, only had my memory, and an old phrase my husband always used to say whenever I doubted something: "If one day you feel you are losing control, look in the attic." At that moment, it didn't make sense, but it soon would, because while my stepson was prematurely celebrating his own victory, the truth was hidden exactly where he never thought to look, in an old, dusty camcorder stored in the attic, waiting for the right moment to reveal who really owned that house. And that moment was approaching. When I closed the door after he left, the whole house seemed to shrink. The silence became so dense it was almost palpable. The document was still in my hand, heavy, suffocating, as if made of lead. My fingers trembled, but not from the cold. They trembled from the impact, from the brutal wave of emotions that came without warning, sending shivers through every part of my body. It was like taking a blow to the chest, a blow that spread shock, anger, and fear with terrifying speed. I sat on the edge of the sofa, but my legs remained restless, swinging without me realizing it. My heart was beating so fast it seemed to be trying to escape from within me. The feeling was one of total disorientation, as if I had been ripped from my own body. The house, that house that had always been my fortress, now seemed strange, threatening, fragile. Every corner that had once brought me comfort now seemed to observe my vulnerability. Fear came first, a paralyzing, deep, almost childlike fear. The kind of fear that makes you feel like you're about to lose your footing at any moment. I thought about everything that was there. The garden I planted. With my husband. The table where we had coffee. The room where we slept holding hands, even after so many years. I thought about the laughter, the silly arguments, the birthdays, the nights we stayed up talking until late. All of that now seemed threatened, as if it could be ripped away from me overnight. My stomach churned. My throat tightened. And for the first time since my husband's funeral, I cried with a pain that seemed too much to contain. I was afraid of losing everything that represented us. Fear of being forced to abandon the place that holds his last fingerprints. I was afraid that no one would believe me. Fear of facing everything alone. Then came the anger. A hot, sharp rage surged through my body like wildfire. Anger at being treated like an intruder. Anger at seeing someone who never respected me trying to take what he never built. Anger at realizing that even with all the internal conflicts, I always tried to treat him well, give him space, show him respect. And in return, I received contempt, coldness, and now, this final blow. Anger made me jump up from the sofa suddenly, as if I'd been electrocuted. I walked around the room with quick, restless, aimless steps. I picked up the picture frames, looked at my husband's face, and that's when I felt the hardest blow of all. Loneliness. Loneliness came like a cold shadow. A shadow that took over the environment, slowly but surely. I realized that, without my husband, I was just a woman fighting against an ambitious young man, surrounded by lawyers, full of arrogance, and with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted in his life. I missed him so intensely, it took my breath away. I missed the way he used to reassure me during difficult times. I missed the way he used to hold my hand and say, "I'm here, you're not alone." But he wasn't there anymore, and that hurt more than any court document. I looked around the house, but it wasn't the same anymore. The walls seemed far away. The furniture looked out of place. The feeling was of being surrounded, cornered, trapped in a place that ironically had always been the safest place for me. Loneliness, anger, and fear mixed together in an emotional whirlwind that almost brought me down. It was like being in the middle of the ocean during a storm, without a life raft, without a life jacket, with no one to pull me back. The question that echoed in my head was simple, but devastating. What will happen to me? I imagined boxes, moving trucks, neighbors watching, my life being ripped away in pieces like trash. It cut me to the core. I thought about what my husband would say if he were alive. I wondered if he would see it as his fault. I wondered if he would feel he left me vulnerable, and that made me cry even more. The injustice I felt was so intense that it felt like a physical weight on my chest. It was as if someone was sitting on top of me, preventing me from breathing. I wondered, how can someone have the nerve to do this to a person who has always treated them well? How can he sleep, knowing he's trying to take a home away from someone who has nowhere else to go? How can someone use their own father's death as a weapon? But amidst this emotional chaos, there was something small, almost imperceptible, trying to emerge. A spark, a gentle yet persistent memory. A phrase my husband always repeated whenever we talked about responsibilities, paperwork, and bureaucracy. If something ever happens, you know where to look. And I knew it. I knew exactly what he was referring to, the attic. But at that moment, in the throes of pain, I couldn't connect the dots. I was too emotionally broken to think logically. I could only feel, to feel the pain, injustice, the feeling of abandonment, and the overwhelming fear of losing everything that represented our life together. The house seemed bigger than ever, but at the same time suffocating. It was as if every corner was watching me, waiting for my reaction. And the paper, still on the table, seemed to call me to a battle for which I didn't feel ready. I sat down again. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. And for the first time since the document came into my hands, I let my heart silence the rest. The pain was there. Anger, too. Massed beneath everything. Something inside me began to stir. Something small. Something still. Something it said very quietly. It's not over. And although I was still immersed in fear, anger, and loneliness, that phrase that tiny seed of strength, would be the beginning of a turning point that my stepson could never have imagined. After a while, I can't say if it was minutes or hours, I was still there, sitting in the living room, staring at the document on the table as if it were a living enemy, breathing, mocking me. The house was so silent that even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed too loud. Every passing second reminded me that, officially, I had 30 days to leave behind. Everything I was, everything I had lived, everything I had built with the man I loved. I stood up slowly. I felt the weight of age, grief, injustice, all mixed together in my bones. I walked around the room as if I were seeing the place for the first time. I ran my hand along the arm of the sofa where my husband loved to lie after dinner, touched the frame of a photo of us on the shelf, stopped in front of the window from where he liked to look at the garden. It was as if every corner of the house was asking me, "Are you really going to let them kick you out of here?" Fear was still with me. Anger, too. Loneliness, then, seemed to have pulled up a chair and decided to stay. But amidst all this, there was something else. Something that began as a whisper, almost imperceptible, deep in my mind. It wasn't a literal voice, but a persistent memory. A phrase I'd heard so many times that it had become a part of me. I kept everything that matters up there. It was my husband. I could hear the timbre of his voice as if he were right beside me. He would say it laughing, somewhat mysteriously, in some conversations we had about documents, papers, memories, and every time he mentioned it, he would look up, at the ceiling, at the attic. At the time, I never paid much attention. I thought he was referring to old things, family mementos, boxes of photos, maybe some letters. I was never very curious about the attic. To me, it was just a space where we stored what no longer fit downstairs. But now that phrase carried a different weight. I kept everything that matters up there. Suddenly, it stopped being a loose memory and became a calling, a strong, almost physical calling, as if the attic itself were whispering, "Come." I walked into the hallway, still unsure of what I was doing. It was as if my feet knew before my head. Each step echoed on the wooden floor, and the house silent seemed to observe. The air was still, but there was a strange energy in the air, something between fear and anticipation. When I reached the foot of the stairs leading to the attic, I stopped. I looked up and felt a shiver run down my spine. The attic door remained closed as it always had been. Nothing about it caught my attention. It was just a simple wooden rectangle, with a rope that, when pulled, lowered the folding ladder. That access had always been there, but I never realized how secret it seemed. For a few seconds, I thought about turning back. I thought maybe I was just tired, emotionally exhausted, clinging to anything that would make me feel a little less powerless. But then the phrase returned, clearer, firmer, as if my husband were standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. "If one day you have doubts about what is yours, look up there." I took a deep breath. It was no longer just a memory. It had become a decision. I pulled the rope. The sound of the metal structure opening and the wooden staircase descending echoed through the house, breaking the silence as if it were a warning. With each creak, I felt my heart beat faster. Dust settled in small clouds, and I smelled in the air that characteristic scent of old things, stored for years, mixed with aged wood. A scent of time. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open staircase, as if assessing whether I truly had the strength to climb it. It wasn't just a physical climb. It was an emotional one. Deep down, I knew that whatever I encountered up there could change. Everything, for better or for worse. "You can handle it," I whispered to myself, as if trying to convince myself. I held onto the handrail and began to climb, step by step, feeling my knees protest, but obeying nonetheless. Behind me, the house remained silent. At that moment, I had the strange feeling that if someone saw me from the outside, it would seem as if I were climbing not to an attic, but into the very history that I didn't yet fully understand. When I reached the top of the stairs, I carefully pushed open the door. The attic was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of light coming through a small window on the side. Those dust particles dancing in the golden air gave the place an almost sacred atmosphere, as if I were entering a secret that wasn't for just anyone. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust to the dim light. Gradually, I could see stacked boxes, old suitcases, bags, furniture covered with sheets, an old safe leaning against the wall. Each object there seemed to tell a piece of my husband's life that I had never fully known, and for a moment, I felt a presence. Not in the sense of seeing someone, but in the sense of feeling. It was as if he were there with me, watching me climb, observing, waiting to see if I would truly have the courage to go on. "You said you kept everything that matters here," I murmured, talking to myself, but actually talking to him. "Then show me, please. I need it now." I walked slowly, dodging boxes, moving an old chair, lifting sheets that covered things that seemed to have been forgotten. But deep down, I knew that nothing there had been left to chance. My husband wasn't the disorganized type. If he said he kept everything that matters in the attic, it meant that somewhere, in that jumble of memories, there was something that could make a difference. The anguish of thinking about losing my house still weighed on my chest, but now it was mixed with a flame of hope. A small, timid, but real hope. For the first time since my stepson handed me that notification, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost. I remembered a specific conversation from many years ago. It was one night when we were in the kitchen, washing the dishes after dinner. My husband was drying the plates while I put away the glasses. Out of the blue, he said, "You know that if anyone ever wants to question what's yours, you'll know where to look, right?" I laughed at the time. I asked him what he meant by that, and he, with that half smile that mixed tenderness and mystery, replied, "Everything that matters, I left up there. One day, if necessary, you will understand." At that moment, I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. But now it makes perfect sense. I stopped in the middle of the attic, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes for a moment. I allowed myself to feel. I miss him. To feel the fear of the situation, to feel the absurd mix of pain and hope, and I also felt something else, a calling. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was a direction. My eyes snapped open, and, without much thought, I was drawn to a specific corner of the attic, where there was an old bookcase with some dusty objects. On it, among old books and small boxes, was something that seemed out of place. An old film camera, heavy, dark, showing signs of age, and with a ribbon still tucked inside. At that moment, my heart raced in a different way. It was no longer the fear of loss. It was the adrenaline rush of someone about to discover something big. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the turning point. Proof that the call to go up to the attic wasn't just because of homesickness. It was destiny. I stood there for a few seconds in front of that bookcase in the attic, observing the object that seemed to call out to me. Everything around it was covered in a thick layer of dust. Old boxes, books with yellowed pages, picture frames without glass, a suitcase that probably wouldn't even open anymore. But the camcorder, it seemed different. It was as if, despite the time, it had a presence, as if it had been waiting for exactly that moment, for that day, for that touch. The dim light streaming through the attic side window illuminated the object in an almost symbolic way. Small golden beams struck the dark, scratched surface of the camcorder, revealing signs of wear, deep scratches, and subtle dents. It was evident that it had a history, too much history, and in that instant I felt a strange connection, as if my husband were there, whispering from some invisible place, "That's what you need." I approached slowly, my heart racing. Each step made the wooden floor creak as if the attic were reacting to my discovery. I knelt before the bookcase, smelling the scent of that old dust rising in the air. My index finger traced the surface of the device, leaving a clean mark and revealing the cold texture of the metal beneath. It was heavy, much heavier than I remembered old camcorders usually being. I picked it up with both hands, as if I were holding something fragile, although it was clearly sturdy. The leather strap was worn, cracked at the edges. The lens had age spots, and the record button was almost faded, as if it had been used many, many times. For a moment I hesitated. Why was that video camera there? Why would my husband keep it in the attic, among so many seemingly worthless things? And why, of all the objects, was she the one that seemed to demand my attention at that critical moment in my life? I carefully turned the device in my hand, and then I saw. The small side cover, where the tape was inserted, was slightly open. Inside, partially visible, was a black cassette tape. The impact of that sight took my breath away. A tape, a video, recorded by whom, when, why? My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what was inside, but the mere existence of that record seemed to change everything. It was as if I had just found a fragment of the past, capable of rewriting the present. I gripped the camcorder more firmly and for a few seconds just stared at it, as if trying to decipher a hidden message. My fingers trembled. My mind began to race in various directions. Was it an old family recording? Some memory my husband wanted to keep? Some important conversation? Or could it be something more? The memory of his phrase, "Everything that matters I put up there," echoed strongly. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the anxiety that was building in my chest. My mouth was dry. It was as if the attic had become even quieter, as if even the dust particles had stopped in mid-air to watch what I would do next. I placed the camcorder on a small table, also covered in dust, and began to examine its details more closely. It was an old model, one of those we haven't seen in decades. It had mechanical buttons, a small side window where the video appeared, and a charging port that probably didn't even work anymore. The smell of aged plastic mixed with rusted metal seemed to bring back an era I could almost visualize in my mind. I opened the lid completely to check the tape. She was there, intact, with a handwritten label on top, "For her." My heart stopped. For her. It was my husband's handwriting. I recognized that curved stroke on the P, that overly small A, the handwriting with a slight leftward slant. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a generic recording. It wasn't just any video lost in the attic. He had left it there for me, intentionally. My hands started shaking more violently. A mixture of excitement, anxiety, and a mild fear took hold of me. What would he have recorded? Why did he call that tape "For her"? Why didn't he betray me while I was alive? Why did you keep it a secret? And why did he leave it in the attic, the place he always said I should look if I ever had doubts? Holding that video camera as if it were a reliquary, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Part of me wanted to press play immediately. Another part was afraid of what I would see, because when a video is left for someone like that, it usually carries truths, deep truths, difficult truths, truths that can change everything. I knelt down again on the wooden floor, taking a deep breath. I was alone in that attic, but at the same time I wasn't. I felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as a living memory, as if he had prepared all of this with care, patience, and love, as if he knew that one day I would need that recording to survive. I ran my fingers along the tape, feeling its smooth, cold plastic texture. I closed my eyes, and I asked in a low voice, almost like a prayer, "What did you leave for me, my love?" The answer did not come in the form of a voice. It came in the form of courage. I opened the small side screen of the camcorder. It still worked, miraculously, even after so many years of being abandoned. The viewfinder flickered a few times, displaying colored lines, static, noise, as if it were waking up after a long sleep. My heart was about to explode. I felt my hands sweating. My whole body tensed up. I knew at that exact moment that my life could change with what I was about to see. That video camera might contain something that would ruin my stepson's plan, or that it would confirm my worst fears. But there was only one way to find out. I took a deep breath, gripped the device firmly, placed my thumb on the play button, and before pressing it, I thought, I had no idea what was on that recording until I pressed play. And then, with my heart racing, I pressed the button. The screen lit up completely, and the past began to speak. When I pressed play for a second, nothing happened. The screen went dark, with some static and shaky lines, as if time was resisting being revealed. I almost thought the tape was damaged, that all those years of dust, heat, and oblivion had erased everything. My heart tightened with fear that this newborn hope would die right there, before a black screen. But then, the image appeared. First, a crooked shot of the room, our room. The same furniture, the same curtains, the same sofa, only newer, more vibrant, more colorful. Then, the camera seems to be adjusted. Someone moves it, the focus improves, the image stabilizes, and then he appears. My husband, vivo, smiling. I sat up immediately as if my legs had been cut off. My whole body shivered. It was as if, by some strange miracle, he had gone back in time just to talk to me, at that moment. His voice, when it began to come out of the camcorder's small speakers, filled the attic, filled the house, filled my chest. "If you're seeing this," he began, looking directly at the camera with a gentle seriousness, "it's because something went wrong down there." My heart stopped. He continued, "Either because you're afraid, or because someone is trying to take what's yours. And if I know my son well, it's probably the second option." I brought my hand to my mouth. Tears began to stream down my face uncontrollably. It was as if he were sitting right there in front of me, talking to me, knowing exactly what was happening now, years later. The camera showed him sitting in our living room, in the same position where we had so often talked about life. He was wearing that blue shirt I liked, the one with the slightly worn collar. His hair was a little grayer, his expression tired but firm. In his eyes there was something different, a mixture of love and preparedness, as if he knew he wouldn't be here forever and had decided to anticipate the evil. "I decided to record this because I know the world, and I know my son," he said, with a frankness that hurt. "He's my blood. I love him. But I know what he's capable of when it comes to money." He took a deep breath, placed his hands on his knees, as he did when he was about to say something serious. "Then let's get everything properly documented." He discreetly pointed to the side. The camera shook, slightly, as if he had lifted himself to grab something out of frame. When he returned, he was holding some folded papers. I recognized that kind of paper. Documents, contracts, things I never fully understood, but which he always told me, "Trust me, this house," he looked up and waved his hand, indicating the space around them, "was bought in my wife's name." I froze. He continued, looking directly at the camera's viewfinder, as if looking into my eyes, years later. "I repeat, in my wife's name. It's not in my name. It's not in my son's name. It's not in anyone else's. The legal owner of this house is her and only her." At that moment, I gripped the camera even tighter, as if clinging to a life raft in the middle of the ocean. I felt a mixture of relief and pain, because it was as if he had foreseen exactly what was happening now. My husband then opened one of the papers and showed it to the camera. The image zoomed in, showing stamps, signatures, dates. I couldn't read everything, but it was clear that he was visually documenting the evidence. "This here is the purchase and sale agreement," he said, pointing with his finger. "It's in her name." He turned over another page. "This here is the property registration," another sheet. "And here," he held up a document that was more than a page long, "is the updated will." The word testament seemed to echo throughout the entire attic. "If you are a lawyer, a judge, or whoever is assisting her with this," he continued in a firm tone, "I want to make it very clear that everything here was done consciously, signed at a notary's office with witnesses. I am not being coerced. I am not confused. I am in full mental capacity, and I am confirming of my own free will that I am leaving this house exclusively to my wife." I could no longer hold back the tears. The tears fell silently, falling onto my hands, onto the video camera, onto the attic wood. There was so much emotion mixed together that it hurt to breathe. He paused, as if organizing his thoughts. His expression shifted slightly. It was no longer merely explanatory, but protective. That was the expression he used when he said he would never let anyone hurt me. "Maybe you're crying right now," he said, in a softer, almost affectionate tone. "And if you are, I want you to know that I thought about you. I thought about how difficult things could get when I'm no longer here." He lowered his head slightly, took a deep breath, and looked back at the camera. "I know my son might try something. I know he harbors resentment. I know he doesn't accept my decisions. I also know he's proud enough to try and turn things to his advantage. So if you, my son, are watching this, at that moment, the atmosphere on the set changed. His gaze hardened. There was still love, but mixed with firmness, with limits. He straightened up on the sofa as if he were facing his own son, face to face. If you're seeing this, it's because you tried to take, what isn't yours. The phrase fell like a sentence. I could almost hear the silence after her. And if it's come to this, he continued, it's because you've forgotten two things, respect and gratitude. He leaned his body forward slightly, bringing his face closer to the camera, making the image even more intense. This house isn't yours. It never was. You didn't pay for it. You didn't build it. You didn't take care of it. The one who was by my side, who woke up with me, who shared the bills, worries, sleepless nights, and joys was my wife. She is the owner of this home. You have my love as a father, but you have no right to this roof over your head. I could feel the weight of every word. It seemed like he was talking to the future, arguing with a son who hadn't yet made the mistake, but whom he already knew he would. You can argue, you can complain, you can kick and scream, he said in a harsh but calm tone. But the truth is here, recorded, on paper, and now on video. He held the documents up to the camera again, making sure everything was recorded. If you're trying to take the house away from her, you're going against my will. You're dishonoring my memory. You're proving that you care more about walls than people. And I didn't raise you to be like that. That passage broke me inside. I knew how hard my husband had struggled to give their son an education. I knew how much he blamed himself for his failures. Seeing that recorded outburst hurt, but at the same time, it strengthened me. Then he turned back to me. His gaze softened. Now, my love, he said, and my heart almost stopped when I heard those words. If you're seeing this, it's because I'm no longer here, and I'm so sorry for that. I'm sorry I wasn't by your side in this fight, but I did everything I could in life to protect you afterward. He touched his own chest with his free hand. I bought the house in your name because I trust you, because you're the person who shared my life with me. I don't want you on the streets. I don't want you being humiliated, pressured, threatened in your own home. That's why I left everything like this. It wasn't by chance. It was a choice. He took another deep breath, as if putting an end to a long conversation. You're not asking for anything unreasonable. You're not stealing anything from anyone. You're just defending what's yours. So please, don't be afraid to fight. I was sobbing, unable to hold back. Each sentence was both a hug and a shove. At the same time, a consolation and a call to courage. Finally, he did something I never imagined I'd see recorded on video. He smiled, that tired smile but full of love, and said, "If this video is in the hands of a judge, a lawyer, someone who can decide her future," I ask, "respect my wishes. This house is hers." Silence. He looked down, took another deep breath, and turned back to face the camera. "And you, my son, if you're seeing this, think carefully about the kind of man you want to be." The image began to shake slightly, as if he were getting up to turn off the video camera. The frame shifted away from his face and back to the empty room. And then everything went dark. The screen went black. But something inside me had been ignited. I carefully closed the camcorder as if I were storing not just a device, but a living piece of my husband. I had no idea what was on that recording until I pressed play. And now, after watching it, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer alone. I had his voice with me. His wishes were recorded. He had proof that the eviction notice wasn't just unfair. It was a direct affront to the memory of the man who built that house. And for the first time since it all began, I felt something other than fear. I felt strength. When the screen went black and the recording ended, it took me a few seconds to be able to move. I stayed there, kneeling in the attic, holding the camcorder with both hands, as if it were something sacred, as if any sudden movement could break not the device, but the connection I had just felt with my husband. It was as if I had received a visit from him, not a dream, not a vague memory, but a direct, objective conversation designed for that moment. His phrase echoed in my head, "This house is hers." And shortly before, in a firm, almost solemn voice, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife." These words weren't just emotional comfort. They were a shield, a weapon, a line, drawn between what was fair and what was abuse. And for the first time since my stepson placed the eviction notice on the table, I felt that maybe I wasn't lost. I had something concrete, something that wasn't just feeling, wasn't just memory. It was proof. Still holding the video camera, I rewound a section of the recording, not to suffer more, but to pay attention to the details. My husband hadn't done it haphazardly. He thought of everything. He not only talked about it, but showed it. In the image, he appears adjusting the camera, sitting with an upright posture, almost as if he were before an invisible judge. He holds the papers carefully, making sure they are in frame. He brings the documents closer to the lens, one by one, while speaking. "This one here," he says, lifting the first sheet of paper, "is the title deed to the house." The camera focuses on the paper. You can clearly see the full name written on it. And the name wasn't his. It was mine. There, printed, registered, stamped. My name as the owner. My heart raced again, but this time in a different way. It was no longer panic. It was relief in the making. He continues, "It's registered in her name. Not mine, not anyone else's. She is the sole owner of this property." He runs his finger over the document, as if he were underlining the information. Then grab another piece of paper. "This is the updated will." He picks it up, opens a few pages, and zooms the camera in again. In it, I clearly specify that, in addition to already having put the house in her name, I reiterate that this property belongs exclusively to my wife, and no one else has any right to it. Not inheritance, not division, not contestation. The camera records the date, clearly visible. A year before he became very ill. A year before that son started hanging around the house more, asking about possessions, about assets, pretending to be concerned. "The house belongs exclusively to my wife," he repeats, staring intently at the camera. "If, at any point, someone tries to take this away from her, this recording serves as a supplement to my will. I know that the law already protects what is on paper, but I want to put it on record in my own handwriting, in my own words, that all of this is intentional." He pauses, takes a deep breath, and continues. "There is no manipulation, no confusion, no coercion. I am fully aware, and I am doing this because I know human nature, and I know my son." This passage deeply affected me. He wasn't just defending an asset. He was anticipating a betrayal and building a shield to protect myself from her. As I watched those clips again, something inside me began to rearrange itself. The fear was still there, of course. I knew my stepson wouldn't simply accept a no easily, but now I had something he never imagined. My husband on video showing document after document, will, property title, date, signature, and on top of that, speaking clearly, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife." I took a deep breath and very carefully turned off the video camera. Then I delicately removed the tape, as if it were a treasure. That little black plastic tape was now, in fact, what could save my life. I placed it inside an empty box I found right there in the attic, closed it tightly, and held it to my chest for a few moments. At that moment, I understood something important. It wasn't just a memory. It wasn't just a declaration of love. It was legal. Proof. The recording had a date. It had an image. The audio was clear. He had his face lucid, speaking coherently. The documents were being displayed, and all of that could be used. The attic, once a forgotten place, now seemed like a revealed vault. I descended the stairs carefully, feeling each step as a step towards a new posture. When I reached the living room again and saw the eviction notice on the table, the feeling was no longer just one of powerlessness. Now that role seemed smaller. I left the box with the tape near me and the camcorder beside it. I spent a few minutes just breathing, trying to organize my thoughts. Reality was setting in. I needed help. I had something very valuable in my hands, but I didn't yet know how to use it correctly. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't understand the legal procedures. I only knew that the truth was recorded, and that I needed someone who knew how to transform it into a defense. I picked up the phone, my hands still trembling. I remembered the name of the lawyer my husband sometimes mentioned, a trusted man who had helped him with some old contracts. I looked up the contact in my address book, found the number, and after a few attempts to gather courage, I dialed. "Hello?" His voice answered from the other end. "Doctor, this is the widow of—" My voice faltered. I took a deep breath and began again. "It's the wife of John. I really need your help." We scheduled a time for the following day. He asked me to bring all the documents I had. I said I had something else, a recording. The next day, when I sat in the chair across from his desk, I felt my heart pounding like it had the day I received the eviction notice. But this time, I wasn't empty. I had something in my bag that could change everything. I placed the tape and the camcorder on the table. He raised his eyebrows. "It's unusual to see one of these nowadays," he commented with a curious half-smile. "My husband left this in the attic," I replied, my voice breaking. "And he left it for me." I told him what was happening. I told him about my stepson, about the document, about the attempted eviction. I told him how I found the video camera, the papers, the recording. He listened to everything in silence, taking notes, sometimes shaking his head with a serious look of disapproval when I mentioned my stepson's behavior. After a few minutes, he turned on the camcorder, inserted the tape, and we watched it together. I paid less attention to the screen and more to his reaction. As my husband appeared, he explained the documents, showed the property title, read excerpts from the will, and most importantly, said clearly, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife." The lawyer's expression began to change. The neutral expression gave way to focused attention. Then a slight nod of approval. Then a glint in her eye that I could only describe as, "Now we have something." When the tape ended, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his hands on the table, and looked at me silently for a few seconds. Then he said, "Her husband was a very intelligent man." I smiled sadly. "He always tried to protect me," I replied. The lawyer continued, "This recording is much more than a personal message. It's very strong complementary evidence. It shows that he knew exactly what he was doing when he put the house in his name. It shows that he was aware, that he acted with clear intent, without pressure, without fraud. And on top of that, he cites, the will points to the documents, shows the property title." He paused briefly and concluded, "This isn't just emotion. This is legal ammunition." Those words filled my chest with a different kind of emotion. Relief, with dignity. It wasn't just spiritual comfort, it was a solid foundation. He continued analyzing, talking about technical terms that I didn't fully understand, but one thing became clear even to me. That recording carried weight. She had a date. She had context. She was, consistent. And in a world where so many people lie, falsify, distort, to see a man looking directly at the camera, showing papers, saying in no uncertain terms, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife," it was worth a lot. "We're going to use this," the lawyer stated. "And I want to see your stepson's face when he finds out that his father not only documented everything on paper, but also left a video message for anyone who tried to override his wishes." At that moment, I felt something reversing inside me. I was no longer just the frail widow being pushed out of her own home. I was the woman who held the truth in her hands. The truth, documented, recorded, signed, spoken, and now ready to be presented. What my stepson didn't know was that, while he swore the house was legally his, the old camera in the attic silently held the exact proof to the contrary. And very soon, he would find that out in the worst possible way. When the day came to confront him, I woke up with a different feeling in my chest. It wasn't complete courage. There was still fear, of course, but there was also something new, firmness. The feeling of carrying the truth, not as a fragile secret, but as a silent weapon. While he had words, I had proof. While he had arrogance, I had my husband's recorded will, and that changed everything. The lawyer advised me not to say anything while the three of us were present, me, him, and his stepson. The strategy was simple. Let the young man display his arrogance. Let him think he was victorious, and then present the recording. Was it cruel? Perhaps a little, But I learned that, with certain people, the truth only works when it confronts you directly, when it tears apart the fantasy they themselves created. He arrived exactly as always, barging in without knocking, with heavy steps, chest puffed out, the same superior look that had become his trademark. Only this time, he arrived with something more, the confidence of someone who thinks he's won. He probably believed I had given up, that I was already packing my bags, that I had already accepted the humiliation he had inflicted on me. "I hope you understand that the situation is serious," he said, not even sitting down, just leaning against the back of the chair, as if he owned the house. "The sooner you leave, the better for everyone." For a few seconds, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My lawyer was there, sitting beside me, calm, organized, with a discreet folder on the table. The stepson looked at him with disdain. "Who are you?" he asked, as if he had no time for formalities. "I'm her lawyer," he replied calmly. "I'm here to clarify a few points regarding the property." The stepson laughed. Laugh, as if it were all a big joke. "Ownership? There's no debate about that. The house belonged to my father, so now it's mine. Simple as that." My lawyer tilted his head to the side, with an almost surgical calm. "Perhaps it's not as simple as you imagine." The stepson huffed, impatiently. "Look, I already brought the document. It's all here," he said, opening his backpack and pulling out printed copies of the eviction notice, as if it were a trophy. "I'm not going to argue." The lawyer crossed his hands on the table. "So let's get straight to the point." He opened the folder. He took out the video camera, clean, but still with its old appearance, and carefully placed it on the table. His stepson looked at it strangely, frowning. "What is this? An old toy?" "No," the lawyer replied. "It's a recording." The change in his expression was instantaneous. A shadow of worry crossed his face. His once arrogant demeanor faltered slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Recording of what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but his tone betrayed something. It betrayed that he was no longer comfortable. Something inside him recognized that the video camera represented danger. The lawyer pressed play. The room fell silent, and then suddenly, his father's voice filled the space. He appeared on the screen, alive, sharp, steady. The stepson froze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His eyes widened. He took a step back, as if he'd been punched invisibly. I watched everything in silence, feeling pain and justice mingling within me at the same time. My husband began by explaining the reason for the recording, explaining the property, showing the documents, and the more he spoke, the more his stepson lost color. It was almost possible to see the blood draining from his face, like someone who realizes he's on the verge of a disaster he himself caused. That could be editing," he stammered, trying to regain control. But his own voice betrayed him. It was trembling, unsteady, desperate. My lawyer remained calm. "Analog video, dated, recorded, uncut. No digital editing. We have experts who can easily verify this." The stepson began to babble. But, that proves nothing. He didn't know what he was talking about." And then came the part that destroyed any argument he had. On the screen, the father said, "I am fully conscious. I am in full mental capacity, and I want to make it clear that this house belongs exclusively to my wife." The stepson staggered a little. The truth was tearing away his mask, piece by piece. The boy tried to form sentences, but nothing came out. "That's ridiculous. He wouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense." But it made sense. Everyone in the room knew, and he knew it too. The recording continued. His father showed the property title. He showed the will. He spoke clearly about his intention to protect his wife. And then came the phrase that was the final blow. "If you're seeing this, it's because you tried to take what isn't yours." The impact of that phrase was visible. The stepson blinked several times, trying to swallow his shame, fear, and surprise. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He looked small, unarmed, exposed. That is, he murmured, but didn't finish the sentence. There was no possible argument. The lawyer paused the video right there, letting the silence weigh heavily. I've never seen my stepson so lost. He seemed to be searching for words in the air, like someone trying to grasp smoke. My client made everything very clear, the lawyer said firmly. His intentions are on paper and on video. You tried to present invalid documents and pressure someone vulnerable. That's illegal. At that moment, the stepson finally understood. It was like watching an entire castle crumble in slow motion. He finally sat down, throwing his body into the chair, completely out of shape. He ran his hand through his hair. She blinked several times, trying to clear her vision, as if she could erase the video from her memory simply by denying it. But there wasn't enough denial in the world to erase that. "I didn't know," he murmured, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. It was a lie, of course. He knew. Or at least, I suspected that my father would never leave me destitute. But he preferred to try. He preferred to bet on my vulnerability, and he lost. His reaction was living proof of that, white as paper, trembling, with short breath, and without a single consistent argument. He knew. He understood at that moment, with all his might, that his plan had ended there. It wasn't just the video. That was the truth. It was the unequivocal wish of the father himself. It was the moral and legal weight of the recording. It was humiliating to see his intentions crumble before witnesses, and it was the fact that, for the first time, he had no control whatsoever. The lawyer concluded by saying, "If you persist with this eviction attempt, we will proceed legally. But if you want to avoid further consequences, I recommend that you leave and reconsider your actions." The stepson did not respond. I couldn't. He was devastated, not by me, but by the truth that his own father had left recorded. That was the moment I understood with complete clarity. His plan ended there, at that moment, with that recording. And for the first time in a long time, I felt my heart fill not only with relief, but of justice. After that meeting where my stepson saw the recording for the first time, a lot changed inside me. But to be honest, the real turning point came the day I sat down with the lawyer for the first time, with the camcorder in my bag and my heart in my throat. Until then, I still felt somewhat suspended between two worlds, the world of injustice and the world of hope. I had the recording, I had my husband's words, I had the moral certainty that I was right. But something was still missing, the confirmation that, before the law, I wouldn't be brought down. That day began like all the others since the eviction notice. I woke up more tired than when I went to sleep. But instead of pacing around the house with a heavy heart, I had a mission. I got ready calmly, put on simple clothes, but ones that made me feel dignified. I carefully picked up the camcorder, as if I were holding a living piece of my husband, and put it in my bag, along with some copies of the documents I found. On the way to the lawyer's office, the journey seemed longer than it actually was. Every corner, every traffic light, every person passing on the sidewalk, everything seemed distant, as if the world were continuing as normal, while I carried in my bag the evidence that could decide the course of my life. I clutched the strap to my chest like someone protecting a treasure. When I arrived, I took a deep breath before entering. The office had that smell of paper, coffee, and seriousness. The walls were lined with shelves of thick books, full of laws I'd never read and terms I'd never understood. I'd always had respect for this legal world, but also a certain fear. It seemed like a place where ordinary people, like me, were always at a disadvantage. But that day, I wasn't just there as ordinary people. I was there as someone who carried the truth in their hands. He greeted me politely, just like the last time. A man with an attentive gaze, a calm voice, and a firm posture. He didn't seem easily impressed, and that gave me a strange sense of security. I needed someone like that. Someone who wouldn't get carried away by drama, but who knew how to see the true weight of things. "Did you bring the recording?" he asked directly, after offering me water. I simply nodded and carefully removed the camcorder from its bag, placing it on the table as if depositing an important file. Then I also took out the box containing the tape and pushed it towards him. "It's all here," I replied, my voice still trembling. The title deed, the will, and him talking, everything. He prepared an adapter to see the content more clearly, turned on the device, adjusted his glasses, and pressed play. I had already watched that video a few times, but even so, my chest tightened again when I saw my husband appear on the screen. It was like reliving the grief and at the same time, gaining strength. During the recording, I observed the lawyer more than the video. He tilted his head at certain moments, paused to read the document shown on camera more carefully, noted dates, underlined details. The more the video progressed, the more his expression shifted from neutral to something I could only describe as conviction. When my husband clearly stated, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife," I saw the lawyer give a small, almost imperceptible sigh of satisfaction. He let the video finish, rewound a short segment to confirm a date, and wrote it down again. Then he turned off the camera, remained silent for a few seconds, leaned back in his chair, and interlaced his fingers on the table. "I'm going to be very direct with you," he began, looking me in the eyes. "You hold something very valuable in your hands, legally and morally." My heart skipped a beat. "So, does that mean he can't get me out of here?" I asked, still afraid of believing too much. "That means that legally, he's trying to override an express, recorded and perfectly valid wish of his father," he explained. "The will would already be enough to protect his rights, the title deed in his name, even more so. But this recording," he touched the camcorder with one finger, "is like an extra brick under the foundation. It reinforces everything. It shows intention, awareness, clarity. It shows that your husband not only did it, but explained why he did it." I felt tears burning my eyes, but now they weren't just tears of pain anymore. They were tears of relief. "So, I'm not going to lose my house?" I asked, almost like a child asking for confirmation. He nodded his head, with conviction. "No, not if he insists on going the legal route. If he insists, he's the one who risks being harmed. The law is on his side. Your husband has everything very well tied up. And this recording, well, any judge with common sense will understand the weight of that." At that moment, I felt as if a heavy chain was being lifted from my neck. Air flowed more easily back into my lungs. My heart, which had been battered day after day, finally found a place to rest. For the first time, I wasn't just facing an attack. I was being defended. He continued calmly explaining the next steps. How to legally respond to the eviction attempt. How to present the documents and the recording. How to officially register. Everything. And how to make that tape a formal part of the process, if necessary. "What if he insists?" I asked, still unsure. The lawyer gave a slight smile, not arrogant, but with a contagious confidence. "If he insists, we'll go all the way. And he could end up not only losing, but also facing charges of bad faith, attempted fraud, and abuse of rights. It's not a good path for him. I've never been one to seek revenge. The pain he caused me wouldn't disappear with lawsuits and stamps. But, knowing that for the first time, he, not me, was the one at risk brought a sense of justice I'd forgotten how to feel. I left that office a different person than when I entered. I went in huddled up, scared. I stepped out, raising my chin a little higher, feeling my steps more steady. The house, when I returned, seemed completely different. Not because the walls had changed, but because I had changed. When I walked through the door, I looked at each room with a gaze I hadn't had in days. The gaze of someone who knows they belong. The gaze of someone who is no longer apologizing for existing. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen, the bedroom. They were my spaces again, not just by history, but by right. I picked up the eviction notice, the one that used to make me tremble, and, for the first time, I was able to look at it without feeling my chest tear open. That piece of paper, which had seemed so definitive, was now almost pathetic. A desperate attempt by someone who thought my emotional fragility would be enough to make me give up what was mine. But now I was different. Not invincible, not made of steel. It still hurt. There was still resentment. There was still an open wound from the actions of someone I once took in. But beneath the pain, there was something new. Structure. I was safe. And most importantly, I knew that. The following days were a mixture of movement and silence. The lawyer took care of the formal responses, the notifications, the deadlines. I took care of myself and the house. I started tidying up rooms that had been neglected, dusting furniture, reorganizing mementos. It was almost as if I were regaining possession, not only physically, but emotionally, of that space. I was no longer an intruder. I was the owner of the house my husband left me. At times, I still felt a pang of fear when I heard a noise at the gate, as if he were about to have another attack. But every time that happened, I remembered the scene. My husband on the screen, showing the title, holding the will, saying in no uncertain terms, "The house belongs exclusively to my wife." And he also remembered the lawyer's voice, "Now you are protected." This combination, love and law, heart and paper, was rebuilding me from the inside out. The change wasn't just in the process. It was inside me. I stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And I started thinking, what am I going to do with the strength this is generating in me? Because in the end, it wasn't just about winning a fight over a house. It was about regaining control of my own life. It was about looking at myself in the mirror and seeing someone who, even wounded, didn't let herself be crushed. Someone who honored the memory of those who loved her, not through pain, but through the courage to defend herself. My stepson never imagined that an old, dusty camcorder in the attic could bring down the entire castle of manipulation he tried to build. But he knocked it down, and in place of the rubble of his plan, I rebuilt something much greater, the certainty that I was not weak. I was just hurt. And now, finally, I was on my feet again. In the days following the confrontation, the house seemed to breathe differently. The everyday noises returned to how they used to be, the creaking of the floorboards, the wind hitting the windows, the ticking of the clock on the wall, as if the atmosphere itself were relaxing after weeks of tension caused by the constant presence of a silent threat. But, while the house readjusted outside, the truth began to spread. I didn't go around telling everyone what had happened. I've never been the type to expose tragedies or humiliations to gain sympathy. But when a situation involves a son trying to evict his own stepmother after his father's death, that kind of thing doesn't stay hidden for long. People notice the changes. The neighbors observe. The family senses the turmoil. And soon the questions started to surface. Some discreet, others not so much. But the reaction that impressed me the most wasn't the world's. It was his, my stepson. After the day he watched the recording, he disappeared. He vanished in an almost dramatic way. He didn't call, didn't send messages, didn't show up at the door with more accusations, didn't send new documents or threats. Nothing. It was as if the mask had fallen so violently that he himself didn't know how to pick up the shards of his own shame. For days, I waited for him to show up. Maybe to apologize, maybe to argue, maybe to try another scheme. But he didn't. His absence filled the house like an echo. Not because I missed him, but because it was living proof that his plan had been crushed by the truth left by his own father. And gradually, the people around us began to notice this absence. The neighbor from across the street was the first, a curious but kind lady who always observed the routines without intruding too much. One day, while I was watering the plants, she approached with that air of someone who wants to ask but doesn't know how. "I haven't seen your stepson around here," she commented, feigning nonchalance. "Is everything all right?" I smiled slightly, too tired to make excuses. "He's sorting out some issues," I replied simply. She nodded, but from her look I could tell she suspected there was more to it than that, and indeed there was. A few days later, a distant cousin of my husband called me. She had spoken to someone in the stepson's family and learned that he was outraged, humiliated, and wronged, in his own words. He said that his father had been deceived by me, that I had manipulated things, and that he, as the natural heir, had been cheated. I listened to everything in silence, with the phone resting on my shoulder, looking at the table where the video camera was, the one that held the truth like a mirror that doesn't lie. I always found it curious how, when the truth exposes who a person really is, that same person tries to hide behind edited versions of themselves. He tried to justify himself, tried to convince family members that I was the villain of the story. But, to my surprise, many of them didn't buy that narrative. In fact, it only took someone mentioning the existence of a recording left by his father for their attitudes to begin to change. One of my husband's brothers, upon learning vaguely about the situation, called me. He was a serious man, difficult to deal with, but honest. Did he really do that? She asked, her voice thick with disappointment. He did, I replied. He tried to kick me out of the house. He remained silent for a few seconds, as if weighing the gravity of it all. My brother wasn't a perfect man, but he always knew what he was doing. If he left something written down, it's because he trusted you. That phrase affected me in an unexpected way, not because of the content, but because of the tone. It was the first time, since my husband's death, that someone had verbalized his trust in me in such a simple and firm way. Gradually, the true story began to circulate. Not because I told it, but because actions speak louder than words. When someone disappears after attempting something unjust, it doesn't go unnoticed, and people start connecting the dots. Some neighbors began to treat me with discreet kindness. One of them even said, "You can always tell when someone is trying to take advantage of other people's kindness." There was no need to explain anything further. But despite all this outpouring of support, there was a deep pain that I had to face alone. The grief for someone who never truly cared about me. I wasn't his mother, but I took him in as best I could. I wasn't his friend, but I tried to be fair. I wasn't responsible for him, but I tried to guide him when he was young. And he turned all of that into a coup. It wasn't just an attempted eviction. It was ingratitude. It was a lack of character. It was the silent cruelty of using the death of one's own father to try to take what was not his. This wound doesn't heal quickly. For many nights, even with the recording beside me and legal protection guaranteed, I found myself awake thinking, what could I have done differently so that he wouldn't have become like this? Did I fail at something? Does my husband, wherever he is, feel sadness seeing his son's behavior? But after much crying and much reflection, a phrase began to take shape within me. A phrase that didn't come from the lawyer, nor from neighbors, nor from family members. A phrase that seemed to come from something greater, something beyond human understanding. Sometimes God uses hidden things to reveal what is right. And when that phrase settled within me, many things began to make sense. The old video camera in the attic, the tape labeled "For Her," the updated will, the title deed is in my name, and even the silence of my husband while he was alive, that silence which, at the time, I didn't understand. Nothing happened by chance. God knew. My husband felt it, and time took care of revealing it. Because when lies try to prevail, the truth usually waits for the right moment to rise up, and when it rises up, no one can bring it down. My stepson's distancing himself was natural. He didn't seek me out to apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer explanations. He preferred to flee the scene like someone who can't face the mirror without feeling ashamed of their own reflection. And while part of me wanted at least an apology, another part understood that some people only reveal who they really are when the mask falls. And when it falls, there's no way to put it back on. I felt pain, a pain that hurts not only in the chest, but in the soul, a pain of profound disappointment, a silent betrayal. To realize that someone I tried to love had no room for gratitude within themselves. But along with that pain came liberation, the freedom to live without fear, the liberation of understanding that it wasn't my responsibility to fix it, the liberating feeling of seeing that I did my part, and he chose who he wanted to be. I continued with my life. I continued taking care of the house. I continued to cherish the good memories of my husband without letting his son's mistakes tarnish everything. I continued walking one day at a time, with the calm of someone who knows that justice did not come from my own hands, but from the hands of God, using precisely what was hidden in the attic. And it was in this mixture of pain and liberation that I finally realized I didn't lose a family. I got rid of a threat, and the truth, that truth kept silent for years, was the bridge that led me back to myself. When everything finally calmed down, When the silence of the house ceased to be an enemy and became an embrace again, I found myself sitting in the living room, looking at the camcorder on the table as one observes a sacred relic. That simple, heavy, old, even outdated object had become the shield that saved my life. Not because of the technology, not because of the aesthetics, but because of the truth it carried. A truth that my husband had left hidden high up in an attic, like someone keeping gold in a safe, waiting for the right moment to be found. Sometimes fate seems to write our stories with invisible ink. While we are living, we don't see the complete picture, only loose dots, disconnected fragments, choices that seem small. But when everything is revealed, we realize that every gesture had a purpose, every silence had direction, every memory had power. And in my case, it was that power that saved me. My husband was always a man of few words, but of great loyalty. He didn't make grand speeches, he didn't promise the moon, but he carried out every decision firmly. And placing that video camera in the attic, recording his voice, his face, his documents, was a testament to his love that I only fully understand now, so many years later. As I relived everything that happened, I realized that much more than protecting the house, he was protecting our legacy. Because a home isn't made of walls, it's made of history. And no one has the right to take away from someone what was built with dignity, sweat, care, and affection. The house was more than just a property. It was the last physical part of him that remained with me. It was the place where our memories slept, where our laughter echoed, where our nightly conversations rested in the corners of the walls. And seeing someone try to take all of this from me, using my father's death as a tool, was a pain that I don't know if it will ever completely disappear. But, at the same time, realizing that my husband foresaw this blow and took care to prevent it, renewed my faith in love, in justice, and above all, in God's silent protection. Because in the end, the truth is simple, but powerful. Sometimes, a memory kept in the attic has more power than the lie of someone who is alive. And now I deeply understand the weight of that phrase. My husband's memory not only revealed the injustice, it destroyed it. His memory not only protected me, it erected a wall against cruelty. His memory not only prevented the coup, it showed the world who truly had character. And that's why I feel different today. Stronger, more aware, more protected. Protected not only by the recording, but by the strength of knowing that I wasn't wrong, that my life, my dignity, and my story weren't being erased. They were being defended by the very man who loved me until his last day. I walk through the house now with a different perspective. Where I once saw threats, now I see victory. Where I once felt fear, now I feel peace. Where I once cried from insecurity, now I breathe with confidence. And above all, I know that my husband has not failed me. He left everything prepared. He protected me even after he was gone. And that's something no coup attempt can erase. The video camera is still stored away, but no longer hidden. It now sits in my closet, in a place of honor, as a reminder that the truth always finds a way to surface, even if it's hidden in dust, old boxes, and forgotten tapes. And when I think about everything that happened, I realize that this story isn't about loss. It's about revelation. It's about justice coming from the most unlikely place. It's about a man's love that extended beyond life. And it's about the courage that is born when we understand that we are not as alone as we thought. Because when God wants to reveal what is right, he uses precisely what the world thought was forgotten.